I'm here with my friend Les Folland. We're in the park here at Orange, and Les, we were chatting yesterday about your role as a teacher. Where are you teaching?
I'm teaching at Orange Christian School, Mr. F.
Mr. F. Yeah.
I'm teaching science and a few other subjects there as well.
Keep going. I was going to say, we were talking about the connection that stories can create in a class, and you're telling me a great story about one of the lads in your class.
Yeah, we've got quite a range of kids from different parts of town in our school, and one of those boys in my Year 9 class was an Aboriginal fellow who was just very leaning backwards, very disengaged, and pretty hard work to teach. And one of the projects that came along was for each student to pick a scientist to get to know and be able to tell their story, and the story of what they discovered and how they did that. And so I got a hold of this young fellow and I told him a little bit about David Knighton, who was an Aboriginal inventor and scientist in Australia, and directed him to go find out about this scientist who came from an Aboriginal community. And for this boy, it was revolutionary. He just, all of a sudden, he went from totally uninterested to utterly focused on getting to know this man, what he did and why he did it as well was really important to him, what difference it made. And it just grabbed a hold of him. It gave him a vision of, I think, an Aboriginal man who went beyond what this boy had seen as the potential for how an Aboriginal man could live life in Australia, to be a contributor, not only scientifically, but to his wider community. He was a really good quality man, did a lot for his people. So that was pretty exciting, watching that difference happen as this boy got to know David Knighton's story. That was great.
And somehow, like, I remember reading that he said, David Knighton said, if you want to know whether the Bible works, look at me.
Look at me.
He saw himself as a sort of a working model of how the Bible wasn't just a narrow religious thing, but it's kind of expression of all of life.
That's right, exactly. And that came through in what the boy came across in his own reading of the writings about David Knighton. So,
and hence he's on the $50 note.
That's right. He's on the $50 note on one of the big notes.
Yeah, that's a big note. Thanks, Les. It's great story. Okay, I'm here talking to Ben. We're in the park at Orange. Ben, you're a school teacher, or have been?
I have been a school teacher and still working around education.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, in Swan Hill, you were part of a team there that had young trainees, and you were taking them into the school, like with a primary school.
Yep.
And they were using stories to connect to them.
Yep.
What sort of things were you doing?
Yeah. So we had a key partnership with one of the local state primary schools, and a key role that we had in that school is to provide a leadership training module for the Year 5s that went into the Year 6 age group. And over the years, the principal there was really keen for us to embed in that leadership stories of Australian leaders that would really inspire the young people. So we bridged those around Australian leaders from Christian history, because we felt we really wanted to, in a sense, be telling the stories of Australian Christian leaders to young people. And the young people who were doing an internship program with us at that stage would go in, they'd develop an understanding of the story, and would often be quite inspired by the people that they were learning about.
So what sort of people they were talking about?
That's, you're going to on the spot now, Paul. You've got to start thinking through. Looked at John Flynn was one of the key people. John Flynn is well known across Australia. What he did is with his pioneering work with the Royal Flying Doctors Service. Also, pretty close to Swan Hill, a bit north of there was a person who brought water. So there's, you're going to have to remind me, Paul, if you can remember the name of the water cart.
Oh, Ferguson.
Yeah, the Ferguson, yeah. So he sort of developed this way of providing water to people in remote regions, and he
was also famous for writing Such Is Life, the novel.
That's right. Yeah. And then also Sir
Doug Nichols.
Sir Doug Nichols, yeah. So Doug Nichols is probably one of the key ones for our area, because the Indigenous community in our school, there was a fairly big presence, and they really, a lot of the young kids, I remember one of the kids sort of put his just enthralled that he heard about a leader from his own people group that was recognised both as a footballer, but then also someone who did a lot around social activism for Aboriginal rights. And that was a great story. That was the first time I'd learned about him, and I grew up, did history myself, like through university.
So did you find the kids really connected to these stories?
They did. Yep, they loved it. That was the key part, the storytelling for them. And then we draw on that and talk about, okay, what can we learn about leadership as a result of what they went through? It might be adversity, it might be that they had to show resilience, it might be that they saw opportunity for others and hope. And I suppose the key message we wanted the young people going through to realise is that each of these Australian leaders did something in service for others. That's really what stood out as greatness, because they servant leadership. And we really wanted to emphasise that anyone can choose that posture of life, whether you've got an accolade or whether you've just got a mate in the playground that you can start doing something for. Yep.
Great. Thanks, Ben.
Yep,
Great.
Thanks.
Well, we're here in Cook Park in Orange. I'm here with a friend, Mick, who's Mick Kennedy's a teacher down in Bendigo. Mick, tell us about your school.
Yeah, it's a big school, about 1,400 kids from Year 7 to Year 10, and yeah, they're fairly disengaged at the moment, obviously coming out of the last couple of years. But I teach English and humanities, so things like history and geography there. So.
Okay. Now, a few years ago, we talked a bit about the story of Bill Ferguson from Dubbo as an Aboriginal activist, and you picked up the story and you've done something with it in class.
Yeah, so, and remember you saying back then is we need to get these stories out there, and I just started teaching a Year 10 class, Year 10 English class, and we do a unit called Australian Stories, and I thought what better place to kind of tell some of these stories, and so I did a particular focus on Indigenous civil rights, and so I told stories about obviously the life of the Aboriginal people before they got some of those citizenship elements in the '67 referendum. So I talked to people like Sir Doug Nichols and William Cooper and Charlie Perkins, but I really wanted to start with Bill Ferguson, and they know a lot about Martin Luther King Jr. and so I was doing some comparisons there, and yeah, and just kind of telling them. And there was one kid in my class whose surname was Ferguson, and he was an Aboriginal lad, so he's quite low literacy, but he really engaged with it, and started writing some a creative piece based on some of the things in there. And yeah, so it was great. So some of the kids are a little bit disengaged, but it was good to see some of them engaging with the story. I was had to use some of Bill Ferguson's own methods to keep their attention. I wrapped up newspaper, kind of banging my hand like that to try and keep them awake.
Statue's got that in.
That's right. Yeah.
Dubbo there,
yeah. So yeah, and so just some of them appreciating knowing more of that story, and so seeing the writing, their creative writing, and seeing them kind of capture their own way of telling similar stories or using similar characters. So
the fact that it's Indigenous, it's Australian, sort of tangible for them.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not something like we said with the American civil rights movement. It's very famous, but it's kind of very other. Yeah. But to kind of see how individual people, and especially good Christian Aboriginal men, stood up and wanted to make a change, inspired by their faith. Yeah, it was a really good thing to be able to tell part of that story.
Excellent. Thanks, Mick.
No worries.